take it away, Zack.
All right. So, Andon chords and driving a culture of experimentation. This is really kind of an opportunity for me to share with you all an experience that I had on a really high performing team a few years back when I was working on a federal contract at a previous employer, Excel Consulting, based out of Arlington, Virginia. And so it's not really like crazy new information or something that's groundbreaking. This is really kind of sharing some struggles that this team was having and what they did about it as far as an experiment goes. But to kick off, share a little bit about myself. Recently started as a Scrum Master at DMI. Like Scott said, just moved from the DC area where I had been working on multiple federal contracts at Excel Consulting. And then I worked as a Scrum Master on Capital One's CreditWise team for about a year. If you're familiar with Credit Karma, CreditWise is Capital One's competitor to that. My favorite Agile book is Turn the Ship Around, which you guys have an opportunity to win. I'm really passionate about empowering teams and self-organization. And I think this book is a great reflection and inspiration for those kind of thoughts. Right now, I am part-time on a project as a project manager for the first time. I'm a Scrum Master and a UXer by trade, so being a project manager is a little out of my comfort zone. And I'm also trying to learn about tennis. My best friend just became head varsity tennis coach and has asked me to be his assistant coach. Never played tennis, don't know much about it, and so I'm going to be coaching tennis this fall. So if anyone knows any tips and tricks about coaching tennis, I'm all ears. And then finally, just being at home all the time with COVID, I'm getting to practice some grilling skills a lot more. I went to James Madison University down in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Both my parents went to UNC Chapel Hill, so if I grew up wearing any other shade other than Carolina blue, they would have kicked me out of the family, I think. I'm a big Nats fan and been to 2 Pacers games, fallen in love with the Hoops in Indianapolis. So actually was at the game last night. It was a great finish for the squad. All right, so what we're going to be covering today, going to go over just some context around this project that I was on, some metrics that this team became really proud of. You're going to hear from Jürgen Apollo, just a quick video on him on just a culture of experimentation, including the celebration grid. Going to talk a little bit about what an Andon is, as well as what the Andon chord is. Then going to go into the experiment that this team ran, the importance of psychological safety, as well as another Andon chord that was done on this project. This concept of the Devops 3 ways, which has been made popular by Gene Kim. And then how can you bring this concept home to your team, and where some struggles and I guess an opportunity that I guess I've been sort of mulling over moving forward. And then actual quotes and insights from this team on reflections of the experiment. So the project history and golden metrics. Like I said, spent a lot of time working on federal contracts. This specific project was within the Department of Homeland Security. Specifically, E-Verify was the project. So if we've all gotten a job and had to fill out the Form I-9, so they do the background check to make sure that we're eligible to work in the U.S. E-Verify is the system behind all of that, and so that was under the USCIS umbrella. When the project kicked off in April a few years ago, it was just a regular Scrum team of roughly 6-7 developers. That's the product owner in the top left with the little Mona Lisa icon, and then one Scrum Master over on the far right. Right when the project kicked off, I was actually the UX designer on the team. So about 6 months into it, project, the team nearly doubled in size. We're still just operating as one Scrum team. And so for all the Agilists that are by the book, it's, 7, ±2 or 6 ±3, whatever your flavor is there for a traditional team. And so we knew that this team was beginning to get too big. Still just one product owner, still just one Scrum Master. But at this point, we're, well over, 10 developers. So not long after that, roughly about a year into the project, hired another Scrum Master and split into 2 Scrum teams. Still just one product owner, but we were at this point working in a large scale Scrum environment. So this is not SAFe, not Scaled Agile framework. This is a less environment. And then finally, that September, we continued to grow and added another team. And so we're now operating with 3 Scrum teams, still working in a less environment. So what this means that there's one large product backlog, and then each team would pull from that product backlog to form their own team's sprint backlog. Still just one product owner across 3 Scrum teams. So there's probably at this point, roughly 25 to 30 people on the project, including the Scrum Masters and the product owner. So some really cool metrics that this product became proud of. Deployments, continuous delivery. So 10 times at least daily to production for a deployment. Code commit would take 20 to 30 minutes before it hit production. And finally, it was, again, e-verify, so it's a production system. The average time for acknowledgement for an incident, so a bug, any kind of outage, was roughly a minute. So these are some things that this team was really proud of. What I am most proud of from this project is the amazing culture of experimentation that existed. And I'm about to show you a video from Jürgen Appelo, but just to kind of provide some context, there was really kind of a fail-safe environment. And so there was experiments that were running all the time where a team would come up with a hypothesis to a problem that they were facing and just try something and see if it would work. And 1 to 2 sprints, revisit it and say, okay, what are we learning from this? And it wouldn't be necessarily a celebration of whether it was successful. It was a celebration of what we learned from these experiments that we ran. And the whole premise of this presentation comes from a massive experiment that one team ran. But what I'm going to do is take my headphones out and share with you all this video from Jürgen Appelo, talking about this concept of the celebration grid. And the celebration grid is really when it clicked for me what a good experiment should look like. So let me take my headphones out and go to this next slide so you guys can listen along.
Should we only celebrate success, or should we also celebrate failure? Maybe we should celebrate both. Party all the time. Well, I have the answer for you. Here is a nice diagram that shows you exactly what you should celebrate. I'm sure that all of you know many good practices, the things that usually work. For example, I often use my smartphone as a timer when I'm speaking at conferences, so I know how much time I have left. But even good practices can fail sometimes, like that time when the alarm of my smartphone went off during my keynote, loudly, and just a bit too early. We also know some bad practices. I prefer to call them mistakes because we often don't do them intentionally. They are the things that won't work, usually. For example, I do not use someone else's computer when I speak at an event. I've had so many problems with missing phones, faulty USB sticks, PowerPoint versions that were installed in the 19th century. I don't do that anymore. Admittedly, sometimes even mistakes can work. Like that one time when my computer died 10 minutes into my talk. I was quite happy to use someone else's system now. And then there are the experiments. We run experiments when we don't know if the behaviors are going to be successful or not. That's the whole point of running an experiment. For example, I have done experiments using no slides, flip charts, getting the audience to do silly things, and I've even experimented with singing on stage. It turns out that learning is optimal when we run experiments, when there's a 50-50 chance of succeeding or failing. We don't learn anything when we just repeat good practices or repeat the same mistakes. Yes, we learn when a good practice fails or a bad practice succeeds. Surprise! But neither happens that often. Some people say, we should celebrate failure. But celebrating failure would include celebrating the failures that come from mistakes. Why would we celebrate those? That makes no sense. Celebrating success seems more sensible, particularly when we focus on reinforcing good practices. The danger, however, when you only focus on success, is that you send everyone in the direction of repeatable behaviors. When people only get compliments for achieving something, they will prefer to follow only good practices. Why run a risk with an experiment? You might fail. But creative organizations need to learn all the time. Interestingly enough, networks are great at innovation, running experiments. Systems theory suggests that creativity comes from networks operating at the edge of chaos. Hierarchies are great at repetition, doing the same thing endlessly. Creative organizations require both networks and hierarchies. The informal network is responsible for exploration, coming up with innovative ideas. Many of them won't work, but that's fine. The ideas that do work, they should be passed on to the hierarchy. The hierarchy is responsible for exploitation, optimizing the ideas that work. A small network of very smart people invented the first iPhone. A hierarchy of thousands of workers produced the other 700 million copies.
Yes, I'm Christoph Braun. I'm a facilitator for Management 3.0 from Germany. And when I teach the module about competency development, I love to use the celebration grid because it helps me and the participants to very nicely visualize how you can learn from doing experimentations and find out that experiments actually are the best way to learn new things. Whether you fail or whether you succeed, no matter, you can always learn from it, and therefore you can always celebrate the learning that you get there. That's why I really appreciate it. It's a very nice visualization of the areas where you really learn very well.
As you can see, this diagram makes it very easy to discuss behaviors versus outcomes and success versus failure. It's a great tool for retrospectives and other kinds of team evaluations. The best thing is, it has experiments right in the middle, reminding everyone that that's what they should be focusing on. So, what should you celebrate? By all means, celebrate your successes. I do so as well. However, more importantly, celebrate your experiments and the things you've learned from them, even when you fail.
All right, so that was
Jürgen Apolo talking about the celebration grid. It's covered in the Management 3.0 book that will be awarded to someone that takes a survey. So taking this concept of experimentation, to really kind of think about having an experiment, you need to have a problem or a challenge that your team is facing at first. So for project managers, agilists, even developers that are out there, I don't have it in the chat. I can pull up the chat real fast. well, this will be like a little interactive piece. So if you've ever heard during a stand-up, I'm almost done. And then you hear the next day, oh yeah, I'm gonna finish this today. Or and then the next day, yep, that task, it's almost done. And you keep hearing that over and over again. If you've heard this before and it drives you crazy, just like either give me like a thumbs up or yeah, see, lots of thumbs up. So this team was really struggling with it. Some great people on this team, some of the best people I've ever met, some of the sharpest people I've ever worked with, but they definitely were heads down developers, and which is the case with a lot of devs. And they often didn't want to ask for help, and it was kind of like pulling teeth to get them to do any kind of pair programming, any kind of swarming around a story, things like that. So this team decided to run a few experiments to try and address this. I won't go into the full list, but it was really different experiments over the course of 3 or 4 months trying to address this concept of, okay, how can we solve this case of the almost dones that we have so that we can actually start pushing stories through to done more quickly and efficiently. Nothing seemed to stick for this team. So as their Scrum Master, for me, sort of my brand of being a Scrum Master is definitely more of, I'm going to talk to you about the knowledge that I have, and then ask you what you would like to do with that knowledge. So I had heard about this concept of the Andon chord, and I'm going to go into the details here in a second. And I thought that what I had learned from just talking to other people about the Andon chord and just really, the knowledge that I gained about it, I thought it'd be a cool thing to just share with the team and say, hey, here's the knowledge that I have. At the end, what do you guys want to do next? So what is the Andon chord? Well, the origin of the term Andon is from a Japanese word for a traditional paper lantern. So that's why the paper lanterns are here. The Andon chord was really made popular in the Toyota production system. So the Andon chord was literally a line along the Toyota assembly line. And frontline employees were empowered to pull this string whenever they noticed an abnormality in the system. And what that would do is, as soon as they pulled the string, there was a light board, and a light would go off on the light board, and people would swarm to that employee and along with managers and say, okay, what's our next steps? And in fact, what the managers would do, they would actually intentionally thank the employee that pulled it. And that was part of creating the fail-safe culture where it's okay to interrupt each other to pull this, because it's really important that we address these abnormalities to get to a root cause analysis. Not everyone would stop their work and work on actually fixing whatever was wrong, but they would at least work together to identify a path forward so that it could eventually be resolved. So now the Andon system, the Andon chord system, it's been widely copied across different auto industries, but it's one of the principal elements of the Jidoka system. I'm not going to go into Jidoka. That could be an entirely different talk, but the Jidoka system is popular in lean thinking. Jidoka literally means empowering the employees. So pretty cool there. I shared this with the team and I said, okay, what do you guys want to do? The team got really excited and said, let's do an experiment. So before I get into what this experiment was, I think it's important to talk about what I feel are the 3 key tenets of what makes a good experiment. The first being, it needs to be hypothesis driven. So use the scientific method. By doing X, we believe that Y will happen. This helps keep the experiment within scope, on the same train of thought. Next, I like to time box the experiments. I think it's good. It's healthy to have a minimum time box and also like a maximum bound to the time box. This ensures, one, that we'll revisit these experiments to inspect and, if needed, adapt to to adjust the experiment, to make it more successful, or we can say, yes, this was a success or this was a failure. Time boxing this gives us an opportunity to celebrate what we learned. What teams will often want to do in experiments, I've found, is the first few days, first few weeks of an experiment, because it's different, it's change, it's painful. And a lot of times people will say, I don't want to do this anymore because I don't like it. It's different. You're taking me out of my comfort zone, out of what I'm used to, and you're asking me to do something else. Well, let's at least try it, because that's what this team committed to. Let's give it 2 sprints at least. And then we'll talk about it in our next retro. And what we'll do is we'll look at our success metrics at the end of the time box. So we need to know, how is this experiment working? How do we know if it's not working? These metrics I like to leave up to the team. It can be as simple as a straw poll saying, hey, do you guys like this or not? What's your vibe on it? It doesn't need to be anything really complex, as long as the team has a way of saying whether an experiment is working or not. So what did this team do? So I gave the presentation on the Andon chord. At the end of it said, okay, we have this problem with the case of the almost dones. What are we going to do? So the team said, we're going to hypothesize that by having our own version of an Andon chord, we're going to collaboratively identify solutions to issues more quickly instead of just feeling stuck. The Andon chord is going to help us identify and create a culture of not being afraid to ask for help, and it's going to strengthen feedback loop on issues. So how are we going to do this? One, everyone's going to be empowered to metaphorically pull the chord. Again, we were working in a small room. This was well before COVID, so we said we're not going to actually string a cord along our desk and somebody's going to pull it. So we need to think something else so that people can pull the cord. When this cord was pulled, the team agreed that everyone would stop what they're doing to identify a path towards resolution. So it's almost a carbon copy from what Toyota was doing, and that the cord would be pulled whenever someone feels stuck or needs the help of the team. And so this would address that case of the almost dones, where folks were kind of hesitant to ask their teammates for help. All right, so next, we need to measure success. So we have the hypothesis. So by having an Andon chord, it's going to help us accomplish those things that I previously listed. How are we going to measure this? First is we're going to look at cycle time. Cycle time being the unit of measurement of time of how long does it take us to get from point A to point B. Today we're going to be specifically looking at how long it took us to have a piece of work, a task that is in development. So this isn't counting business review, QA, anything like that. This is just the amount of time that something is being actively worked on by a developer. We're also going to find a way to measure collaboration. This team really desired an increase in their collaboration with each other, as well as timeliness. So learning about issues as they arise, an issue being really if somebody feels stuck or not, or somebody's struggling. This team was a mix of very junior developers and also very senior developers. And so this was, a way of getting, folks that maybe didn't have as much experience to say, hey, I need some help. I have an issue with this. Let's talk about this. So the team decided that they were going to track success by literally looking at the cycle time metric, compared to also finding a way to track how frequently the Andon chord was pulled. At this point, I was already capturing the cycle time metric. I would share it daily. It was I had a 3-week rolling average of the cycle time. And what I did was I created a 3-week rolling average of daily Andon chord pulls. Cycle time obviously would be measured on its own, and collaboration and timeliness would be measured by the frequency of the Andon chord pulls. And I will go into the data here in a second. I actually think this is the coolest part of it. But before I do that, I'm going to show you all what the experiment was. So lights, camera, action. We use Slack as our primary method of communication that wasn't face-to-face. So what the team did was, you'll see me type Andon in Slack, and they created a Slack bot that would give an et here, which for anyone not familiar with Slack, it basically gives you like a push notification to your computer or your phone if you have it enabled, and it says, hey everyone, the Andon chord's pulled, time to pay attention. Not only did they do this, the team totally nerded out on a Friday afternoon, and I'm not sure the whole technical piece of what they did, but they created an if this then that integration with some Alexa or some Amazon smart plugs, and that Slack bot triggered this happening in our team room. So you get a little red light going, flashing Christmas lights, and I mean, you got to have a dancing tube, man, because that's just way too much fun. So whenever Andon was typed in the Slack channel, this is what happened in the team room. Now, totally get that many of us are not in a team room. We haven't been in a team room for the better part of the last year and a half or so. So one of the questions that I've sort of been going through is how can we, what are our opportunities to create something fun like this in a remote environment? And so I guess as continue on with this presentation, maybe that's something you can be noodling over. But anyways, really cool experiment that the team came up with, and really fun. So now for the part where I sort of nerded out, the data visualization. Here we go. So I'm going to walk you guys through this. If you have any questions, you need me to come back, I'm happy to do this, but let's kind of get into the data behind the team's experiment. So May 25th, down there on the x-axis, is when the experiment began. This shows that the team's cycle time, so how long it took a piece of work to remain in development. At this point, it was roughly 3 days, 3 days in progress. This is when the experiment begins, taking us all the way to middle of June. So they're basically hovering between 3 and 4 days for a piece of work to remain in coding. So you'll see here in the orange line, using sort of the same method of a 3-week rolling average, this is our average daily Andon chord pulls. What I would do is in the Slack, I would look to see how many times Andon was typed that day, and I would just track it like that. And so again, it's a 3-week rolling average. And so, the first few days of the experiment in late May takes some time to really kind of get the experiment off the ground. But you can see as we're entering, the middle of June, the Andon chord pulls, not 0 times a day, but about every other day is how often it was being pulled. So what you're seeing right here is the same data from before, but I'm going to start showing it to you over the course of a longer period of time. So again, the experiment started near the end of May, taking us to late June, where the team was pulling the Andon chord about once every other day. No, went the wrong way. All right, so the bad news happened. We get to the middle of the summer, vacations starting up. It's the end of July. The average daily Andon chord pulls hit rock bottom at 0. Again, this is just 2 months into the experiment. And at the same time, our cycle time, this is just for a piece of work to be in development. This does not include QA, product owner review, business review, anything like that. In development went up to 11 days, an all-time high for this team. So we looked at this during a retrospective and said, it's time to inspect and adapt. It's an important piece of retrospectives and just really working on any team, whether it's a Scrum team or not. The team said, hey, the Andon chord, it's really helpful when we use it, but we're not using it. And then we said, why are we not using it? Well, there's still a fear of failure at the individual level. So, if I'm putting myself in the shoes of a developer, especially a young developer, even a senior developer, I'm saying, I'm afraid to say I don't know, I don't have the answer. I'm afraid to say I need help, or I'm afraid to say what I'm working on is more important than your time right now, because I see, you have your heads down, you have your headphones on, you're typing furiously. Why should I feel like I can interrupt you right now by typing Andon? So that fear still exists, and that's what the team talked about in a retrospective. So that's the inspection. Now for the adaption, what did they change? The team changed the phrasing of the experiment to say, we're going to pull the Andon chord whenever we need the opinion of the team on anything. So that could be, let's go grab lunch together. What did you guys think about this movie? What can we do about this coding issue I'm facing? And so it was a myriad of things, but it wasn't necessarily work related. And so it was really just whenever they wanted to talk about something. And so getting the team in the habit of just pulling the Andon chord more often, it broke that barrier to entry. Here's what we saw. Late July is when we changed up the experiment to be whenever we need the opinion of the team. They started pulling the Andon chord for, odd things. Could be anything. The Andon chord pulls went up to over once a day, and our cycle time dropped at the same time. Now, I know, correlation doesn't equal causation, or vice versa, whatever it is, but this was pretty stark for us to have this much data over the course of well over 3 months, and to look at this and say, hey, when we're collaborating more often, when we're interrupting each other, asking for help, we're actually moving work through more efficiently. And one question that has come up in talks I've done for this previously is, did we notice an increase in bugs or incidents because we were moving things through more quickly? No, we weren't at all. So this was really cool for the team to look at. And over the course of the remainder of the life of this project, before we had involved move on to different work, it kind of formed a heartbeat. And so you can see when our Andon chord pulls went down, the cycle time went up for how long it took us to get something through. What we had to do here is we just had to keep reminding ourselves the importance of this experiment. Over the course of this time, we had new team members coming on board, and sort of had to get them embedded in the culture of this team. And so, over the course of the year of this experiment, we really just kind of had to keep reminding ourselves, hey, this is really valuable. We should keep doing this. So that's why you see it going up and down, up and down. But that's why it's good to continue to inspect and adapt our processes so that we can remind ourselves why we decided to do what we did. And if you like something that looks a little bit simpler, you can see, this is the same data, just in a different format. But our cycle time went from about 3 days to 11 days over the course of that experiment, while the Andon chord pulls went to 0. And then when the Andon chord pulls went up to over once a day, the cycle time dropped. So really cool stuff. The team was really excited to see this, because it shows them that there's we can measure our collaboration through the Andon chord pulls. We can measure how timely we are addressing different things, and then we can also measure our flow by looking at how quickly we can move something through with our cycle time. Another metric that I tracked with this team was their happiness. So on every Friday, I would send out an anonymous poll, and it's a 1 to 10. So this week, rate your high point, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, 1 being the lowest, and also rate your low point. This is the data before the Andon chord experiment. And this is what happened after the team began doing the Andon chord experiment. The team started this experiment at a time where they had just deployed kind of the heart of E-Verify to production. And so they were feeling kind of burned out. And I think that this experiment was a way for them to sort of flex their creative muscles in a way that wasn't just coding. And the team, because I asked them what they wanted to do with this information that I'd given them about the Andon chord. I didn't tell them that they should do it. I really wanted them to, but if I just told them to do it, it was going to be my experiment. It wasn't going to be their experiment. And so the entire time that I was on this project, they talked about it like it was completely theirs. So it didn't matter where the idea came from. What mattered is that the developers on this team felt like they owned this, and they absolutely did. So you can see that their happiness, ticked up.
Hey, Zach, we've got someone posted a question in the comments. Was there a reason for the outlier 5.25 low on that?
Yeah, good question. So I really kind of look at this as far as like as an overall trend, like over the course of a month, are we trending up or down? Because there are some people, if people were out on vacation, I wouldn't include them in the happiness metric. And so I think probably on that one, there was a point where there was somebody that was looking for a change of scenery, a different project they had been on, working on E-Verify for the better part of 3 years, and I think they were starting to feel a little burned out. So I didn't read into the 5.25 too much, because still the overall trend was in a positive direction. Good question though. So again, I kind of already touched on this, but just looking at the success metrics that the team laid out, we saw a reduction in cycle time by pulling the Andon chord more often. We saw that we were able to increase our collaboration with the Andon chord, and we also were able to recognize, hey, by pulling it, we can learn about issues as they arise. This experiment would not have been made possible by without having a culture that was psychologically safe. My mentor, who was the first Scrum Master on this project, and eventually became my boss. I still keep in touch with him really closely. Was the sole proponent behind experimentation and self-organization and empowering the developers and the actual Scrum teams to make decisions for themselves. And that helped us right from the get-go of kicking off this project, of creating an environment that we felt safe to fail, and we felt safe to try things and celebrate what we learned, whether it was successful or not. We knew that just by learning about how we do what we do, we're going to become better as a team, and we're going to be able to deliver more efficiently. I think it's something that often gets overlooked on teams and on projects, is giving people the opportunity to define their own processes, and also giving them the freedom to fail a little bit. I think that we always have these tight deadlines, and it can be really hard oftentimes, but by just giving the people that are doing the work a little bit of flexibility to define their own processes, it's going to help morale. And I think happy people and happy teams is a huge part of what goes into making teams high performing. So transferring that over to this experiment and with this team, psychological safety contributed to allowing people greater comfort in speaking up. We addressed issues more quickly. No one was frustrated when the Andon chord was pulled. If you have a developer who's really stuck on something, but type Andon, it would interrupt anything. No one got mad about it. It was never like, again, like you're asking another question. It was, hey, let's tackle this because we're a team. It's same concept in sports. It takes a team to win. It's not going to be an individual that's going to carry the whole squad. And then this Andon chord had a ripple effect across not only this team, but across the project. And it led to a product-wide Andon chord. So going back to the project itself, again, 3 different teams working within one product backlog, on a production level system that ran millions of cases a year. I mean, think about all the people that get hired for a job in the country, and that employer needs to process it and e-verify. It's all coming back, whether regardless of what the front end system looks like, there's that back end that still hits e-verify, and this team was supporting that. This group of 30 people, so pretty impressive what they were doing. If something went down, it would be really bad. Employers couldn't, run their e-verify cases, and they have to do this within 3 days of somebody being hired. So at the product level, what do we do? Well, did the same thing. If you typed in the, product-wide Slack channel, Andon, it would do a code red. So similar lights would go off in our big room, and it would actually be an at channel. And so the difference between at channel and at here is at channel would give you like an email. Even if you have your Slack turned off on your phone, it'll still ping your phone. It's a little bit more in your face. This was reserved for more major issues. So if there's a production outage, this was when the product wide code red would be reserved for. This allowed the team to assess the issue more quickly, helped us get key personnel. Again, kind of thinking back to what Toyota does. It's not, hey, we're all going to stop what we're doing and not get back to what we had been doing until this issue is fixed. We're going to identify a path towards resolution. So making sure that we have the right people and the right knowledge around this issue so that we can solve it. But once this was assessed, team members would go back to what they were doing if they felt like they weren't needed for this. So this wasn't one of the books that I recommended, but if you've ever heard Gene Kim speak, he's the author of the Phoenix Project, one of the big time thinkers behind Devops. He actually visited our team room when he heard about this experiment, and he's I think he's even written about it in one of his books, and he's talked about it frequently in his presentations now. So if you ever hear Gene Kim talk and you hear him talk about this Andon Chord experiment, he's talking about what this team did, which is really cool. But he has these 3 ways of DevOps. The first being flow. So flow meaning, how can we reduce our work in progress? How can we remove constraints, bottlenecks, and how can we find ways to simplify and improve workflow? Feedback, how can we shorten feedback loops? How can we embed knowledge where it's needed? And then finally, continual learning and experimentation, getting back to that, fail-safe culture where we celebrate what we learned instead of just what we've done right. And then also just giving the freedom to improve how we do what we do, making times to improve daily work processes. So coming back to developing a culture of experimentation, using this concept of the DevOps 3 ways, in pair with the celebration grid was one of the core tenets of this project, and something that we often reflected back upon as we were coming up with experiments and evaluating sort of our culture as a whole. So bringing it home, I know a lot of us are already at home. We're not in the office right now, but I still want to talk about you with your teams in your workspace, and sort of kind of the things that come to mind for me as to what can make a culture of experimentation possible, as well as sort of an opportunity for moving forward. So the first one, coach. I'm a former high school basketball coach. Be a guide. Don't dictate. Teach them about what you know. If you have all this knowledge, especially in leadership roles, or even if you're not in a leadership role, whatever you know, it's good to let the team know about these things. Ask, don't tell. Super important. I think this is what made the experiment so meaningful to this team in particular, was that they weren't told what to do. It was a simple question of, what do you want to do next? Provide freedom. Talked a lot about this already, but creating that culture where we're celebrating learning, not necessarily just what we're doing right. So, thinking back on that celebration grid, experiments that have an equal chance of success and failure, and that have that freedom to fail, is what's going to provide us the most opportunity to learn. Finally, have fun. This experiment was a blast for the team. The happiness metric went up. You can see that we had a dancing tube man, Christmas lights strung along the room. So it was really fun for the team to come up with this, and it was clear that they weren't taking themselves too seriously when they created this experiment. Moving forward, so going into like the sprint book for a second, which is another book that y'all have an opportunity to win by doing the survey. There's a big concept behind how might we's, and so what it essentially does is it rephrases challenges and things that aren't working into opportunities, and we do that by just taking a simple problem and rephrasing that into a how might we statement. So I have a how might we statement for us, something that I've been kind of thinking about really since COVID started. It's in an environment where the number of teams that are co-located is decreasing. How might we form a culture of experimentation so that creative ways of collaborating can be explored? And instead of just saying, hey, COVID sucks, like how can we, we can't collaborate the same way as we could before. We're incredibly smart people. I believe that if, in this country, if we can get man on the moon and space rover onto Mars, we can, figure out how to navigate better ways of collaborating remotely. That's fun, that kind of mimics what we had before, or something close to it. So this is a great, conversation point, talking point. I don't have an answer to it right now. But it's something that I'm hoping to continue to explore, but it's sort of where I'm at right now, and my journey through remote work. But you've heard a lot from me as far as what I liked about this experiment. These are actual Slack messages from the team. So Jen was one of the leads on this project, and so she got to sort of see from a bird's eye view of how this affected the team. She saw a huge morale boost. It offered an outlet for all types of people that wanted to kind of get down into the nitty-gritty of the data or experiment with, if this then that types of integrations. She said it was just what the team needed to become reinvested in the project overall. Not only that, but this team became leaders in the project. And so we actually saw a lot of folks emerge as key leaders on this project because of this experiment. Because like I said, the team ran the Andon Chord experiment, and eventually it led to a product-wide Andon Chord experiment. And it was completely driven by the team. It wasn't anything that I pushed for. It was purely the team saw value in it and wanted other people to do it. Andrew said that he was surprised that the team embraced the idea of reacting positively to all the Andon Chord pulls, and wasn't being bothered by the sudden interruption. Brian talked about how we were able to identify and resolve critical issues faster, and Drew liked the visual indicators in the room. He said it was just distracting enough to get his attention, which, I mean, if the two man and the lights aren't going to get your attention, I'm not sure what is. Matt said that he was surprised that folks didn't mind being interrupted. Nick saw an increase in collaboration, and Andy was huge on pair programming, so he was really excited to see communication increase, more pairing and swarming, and just a general higher level of engagement. So Joe, love Joe to death, but he's notoriously bad at checking Slack. And as I was collecting feedback on this experiment from the team to include here, I sent Joe a message on Slack and he didn't check it, but then I typed Andon, and he, then was able to stop what he was doing. I said, hey man, I sent you a Slack message a while ago. Can you respond to it? And so Andon Chord worked for, in many different ways, but basically said, it's backed up by months of data. So the team was proud in the data visualization that I shared earlier. The team became more engaged, problems were addressed sooner, and productivity was higher. So that's the story of the Andon Chord experiment, and how this project sort of had a culture of experimentation, and really appreciate everybody's time. I will stop talking and kind of hand it off to any questions.
Hey, Zach, great presentation. Patrick Wagner here. Also a fellow Scrum Master, release train engineer in the scaled agile context. And we have teams that work in sort of failure averse environments. When the stakes are high, experimentation is quite often infrequent. How do you encourage experimentation using a similar structure in context when the stakes are high, so to speak?
Yeah, I think it's sort of time and place. I think there's always opportunities for experimentation. And so when the stakes are high, it's what are the small wins that we can do to make ourselves happy? Whether, we as a team agree to take a 5-minute stretch break every day, because by doing that, we believe that we're just going to be happier. And we can measure that by looking at our happiness metrics. And so just as a Scrum Master, or, really whatever role you have, whatever ways we can do things to improve how we work together, I think there's always space for that. It doesn't have to be this massive process thing, because obviously, if the stakes are super high, probably not going to be running an Andon Chord experiment, right off the get-go, because we might not have the latitude to, have that, cycle time go up to 11 days. We did in this environment during that period of time. But I would just encourage you from, looking at, what can we do from a morale perspective to improve things? Because when the stakes are high, often that's when morale is the lowest.
Cool, thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else? Just giving space if anything else pops to folks' mind. Pull the cord, right? And so you can.
There's a question in chat.
So Mark asked, do you have examples of experimentation in development when there is a budget and expected deliverables? It's difficult to build in time for experimentation as it's seen as wasted time. That's a good question. So I would, I'm actually working in a waterfall project right now. So it's, fixed time. And I've slowly began integrating like small retrospectives. And basically I call them checkpoints. I'm not calling them retrospectives. And I'm doing it every 2 weeks because that's roughly a sprint. And again, I'm not telling anyone, but I'm just being sort of, sneaky about it. And during these checkpoints, I'm just saying, hey, what are we doing well? What's not working so well? And what are ideas that we have to, do better? And again, kind of, going back to Patrick's question around, a high stakes environment, you might not have necessarily the bandwidth to do a massive experiment like this, but there's always room to have these small wins where we can have healthier and happier teams. Because I think at the end of the day, if we have happy people working on things, we're going to deliver things more effectively. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be for, how we code, it's how do we work together.
I have a question. When you first started this, I guess I would think that you might have a lot of naysayers, or, this is such a waste of time. And Was there any measurement of like productivity? I know you got cycle time, but overall like quantities, did you show that and I missed it? And could you say, yes, it went up, or, because morale went up?
So this was something we talked to project leadership about it and said, can we allocate a half day on a Friday afternoon for this entire team to create this experiment? Really kind of the sort of the if this and that integration and whatnot. So the team swarmed on it, and over the course of 4 or 5 hours, with maybe a few beers in them, they threw this together. And really a lot of them did this in their spare time too. They felt so passionate about this experiment. It might have been something that was really unique to this team and this group of people. But again, it kind of goes back to, this was a problem that they had been trying to solve for months, and they finally found something that they were passionate about. And this was a release for them to come up with something fun, something that they felt they owned, instead of it being something that people were telling them to do, because they were working on really kind of like production level minutia bugs. And I think the monotony of that was really kind of wearing on them. So this was really fun for them. So I know it's kind of a cop-out answer to say, oh, they just worked on it in their spare time, but they became so passionate about this that it was, it was kind of recreational at this point for them.
So, hi, this is Ruth.
Earth.
How long did it take the rest of the company to start seeing the value in this? Did you have to wait the full year before they said, oh, yeah, you had value, or did you get a good response and some support fairly quickly?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for the rest of the project, I would say they adopted the Andon Chord as a whole. So the initial experiment started for this team in late May, and then I would say in November was when the rest of the project had adopted it as an experiment. Some of the other two teams, they also were running their own flavor of the Andon Chord within their team.
Mm-hmm.
And so we really had like 4 Andon Chord experiments going on at the same time. So one for each Scrum team, and then one at the project level. But I would say that the buy-in really happened when they saw the data in September, when the Andon Chord pulls went up and the cycle time went back down.
Yeah. I have one team that does this naturally and 2 that fight it. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, well, what it came down to is seeing how passionate these individuals were over this experiment, but the data definitely didn't hurt. And being able to show them, hey, this works. It's clear that it works.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, great question.
All right, last call. Anything else coming to mind?
And if you think of something later, or think about you just want to kind of continue this conversation, I included my personal email as well as my work email on here. So I'd love to connect. I'm on LinkedIn, so definitely reach out. Again, I just moved from DC, so I need to meet people.
Yeah, great. Well, you met several people tonight, so to speak. So hopefully we'll get some connections and interactions for you.
Awesome.
Well, if nothing else, thank you again, Zach, and I appreciate you plugging our survey throughout your presentation. So we will be following up with those that attended with the survey just to get some feedback on this presentation. And like I said, we'll be drawing names for the 3 books, and then one of us from the board will reach out and let you know that if you won, and get your address that you'd like us to send the book to you. So again, Zach, thank you for joining us, and everyone, thank you for joining us. Hope you guys, hope we'll see you in June for our next presentation. Have a good evening. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Scott. Bye. Thanks, Zach.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.